Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Amir Abbas, and today we are here once again live with you people. And I welcome all of you who are watching this live stream live. And I also welcome those who will be watching the recording of this video. Today, we are going to start with a new series which is named as Epi Talks. And I'm Dr. Amir Abbas from Pittsburgh, United States. And today we have a guest with us. We have a guest speakers. We have a guest speaker named Salima Kerai. She has done her bachelor's in science of nursing from Aga Khan University. After that, she completed her master in epidemiology and biostatistics from Aga Khan University. She has worked as a community-based health researcher for several years, studying child health in urban slums of Karachi, Pakistan. Currently, she is enrolled in a doctoral program in population and public health at the University of Columbia, at the University of British Columbia, Canada. Her research interests include positive child and youth development, child well-being, social determinants of health, respiratory infections in children, trauma and injury prevention in low and middle income countries. So first of all, I'm really thankful to Salima for taking her time from her busy schedule and giving us time for this live feed. Those of you who are watching this live, I will request you people to share this live stream among your circles so that more people can join us in this live stream and make it interactive. Before I call Salima to begin her presentation, today's presentation is on causal models. And before I invite Salima to begin her talk, I will have to emphasize that the live stream is important because we want to enhance interactivity. So whatsoever questions you have, you can put them in the comments and we will take the questions in the end. But if something is obviously not clear in between the presentation, you can just let us know to repeat that particular concept in between as well. And so without any further delay, I will invite Salima to start her talk. Over to you, Salima.
Thank you, Amir. Thank you for this opportunity and thank you for the introduction, for the generous introduction. Without any further ado, I'd like to share my screen and would start today's presentation, which is on causal models. So just bear with me a minute to share my screen. So, good morning, good evening, good night. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Everybody who is here with us, thank you so much for coming and making this talk a success. So, today, as Amr introduced, that I will be talking about, I will be introducing some concepts in epidemiology which are less commonly talked about, which are new, or in some concepts that requires our understanding in more depth and detail. So I'll be beginning my EpiTalk series from the causal model. This is the disclaimer that whatever I'll be presenting, discussing, or speaking in today's presentation is solely my views and understanding and may not be complete and accurate. So you may need to refer the other resources or books or something else in order to verify or check that. Okay, so outline in next few minutes, the time that I have, I'll be speaking about broadly the purpose or the goals of regression model building, and I'll be talking in more detail, in more close-up about the causal models. Okay, so now, what are the purpose of model building? As you might have known or are aware that statistical models are the tools, are the statistical tests, are the processes that we apply to a data set. When we apply those statistical tools, models, or analysis to a data set, we want to make sense of the data. We want to identify the patterns. We want to identify the trends. We want to translate the data into information, into facts. We are we are the scientists that we are the analysts or scientists or epidemiologists or researchers that want to draw the conclusions. We want to draw inferences and we want to use those inferences to create and tell stories, to tell the world, to tell or inform the general public, or to inform the program planning or the policymakers about what needs to be done. We are backing our saying on the scientific evidence. That's why we call it evidence-based research, because it's not whatever it is being said, it's not being said by us from our heart or from our mind. It is being shown by the data. So broadly speaking, whenever we dive into any analysis, what are the key questions that we need to ask? So, one thing that pops up into my mind is, what is the goal of model building? Why are actually we doing the statistical analysis? Why we are actually using the model? We have really used this word so many times in our life. So, before building any model, the key questions that we ask is, what is the purpose and the motivation? And broadly speaking, very broadly speaking, there are two main purposes. One is causal explanation and one is prediction. You might be wondering, what is causal explanation and what is prediction? So just bear with me. In next few slides, I'll explain what is causal explanation, what is causal modeling, and what is prediction modeling. Okay, causal explanation or explanatory modeling is the use of statistical method where we are testing the theory. We are testing the relationship between X and Y. We are testing the association between X and Y. We want to know that X really affects Y, or X is the cause of Y, or X is leading to Y. X is how it is related to Y. Is it causally related or it is not causally related? What we are interested in the effect estimates such as odds ratio, prevalence ratio, risk difference, risk ratios, incident rate ratios, and things like that. These are our effect estimates when we want to quantify. Sometimes we quantify with the correlation coefficient. So we want to quantify, is there an association or not? So p value generally tells us that. And what is the magnitude of that association? Then we need the effect estimates. So these are generally association based model used in observational studies such as cross sectional, case control, and cohort studies. And these are also these causal models are also the cornerstone of experimental studies. So please mark my keywords, that when we want to explain the association between X and Y, does X leads to Y, does the exposure affects the outcome, then we use causal modeling. And this is a cornerstone of all the observation and experimental studies. And one more key aspect to remember and to understand in causal model or causal explanation is that we need a priori theory. We need a priori hypothesis. We need a model and framework before we do any analysis. So we need a theory to guide our model building. We need a theory, a causal theory, before we look into the data or before we do any fishing into the data. So in few of my later slides, you will understand why I am emphasizing and what is the role of theory, why it is important to have a priori model before building any causal model in a statistical analysis. So let's look at the example to understand this causal model more better. So for instance, if we are interested in understanding the relationship between physical activity and blood pressure, we would hypothesize that physical activity would reduce the blood pressure. So I would research question that I might ask is, does exercising regularly, say 30 minutes per day, leads to lower blood pressure? So this is the causal model that I build, or the conceptual framework that I build. But exercise leads to blood pressure, lower blood pressure, and lower blood pressure leads to lower cardiovascular risk of lower cardiovascular diseases. And there are other host of factors and variables in the universe that affects the relationship between exercise and blood pressure. For instance, age, salt intake, and there are many unmeasured variables which we cannot potentially measure in our study. So, in order to know the true or the valid effect of exercise on blood pressure, what do we need to do? We need to think of all the potential confounders, measure it, and then control it. So, I'll be talking about confounders in my next slide. But the key thing to remember here is that in the causal model, we are estimating the effect of X on Y, the effect of exercise on blood pressure, and we need a true, valid, and unbiased effect. What is unbiased effect? Unbiased effect is effect which is representative effect, which is free of error, which is free of biases. So I'll be unpacking this unbiased effect in my later slides, but just want you to understand that we are understanding the relationship between X and Y. Okay, now example 2. Does daily use of aspirin, say after age of 80, leads to reduced risk of stroke? Again, in order to understand the intake of aspirin on the risk of stroke, we need to understand the universe. We need to understand all the potential variables that can affect this relationship. For instance, the smoking affects both aspirin and the risk of stroke. Atherosclerosis Also, I mean, aspirin affect risk of stroke through reducing atherosclerosis, and there are other health-seeking behaviors. Those who have healthy habits might take aspirin daily, might are more compliant, and those who does not have much health-seeking behaviors. So it is important to understand that it's not only the two variables in isolation; they are interdependent. They are linked to many other variables in the real-world setting, and the relationship is very complex. So uh, we need to think before designing or at the time of designing the study, what are the potential other variables that could affect the true relationship. And again, we are interested in the unbiased effect of aspirin on the risk of stroke. This is the third example related to COVID, that people were interested in knowing the effect of high dose of fluoroquine on reduction of coronavirus infection, which is measured by viral RNA load. And again, this relationship is affected by a host of other variables, which is age, arrhythmias, death, malaria. And we are interested in unbiased effect of chloroquine on COVID-19 infection rate. So now I'll take a pause of 1 second and we'll move on to our next section, which is predictive modeling. I hope I have explained in detail about what is causal modeling. We'll be unpacking about causal modeling in further detail in few slides. So predictive modeling. Predictive modeling is the use of statistical methods or models for predicting new or future observations. In prediction model, we don't generally care about our effect estimates, OR, RR, and things like that. These effect estimates are irrelevant. We are interested in looking how well our exposure predicts the outcome. So estimates we are looking here at, for example, we are looking at sensitivity, specificity, positive predictive value, negative predictive value. So it is important to understand that prediction models are the individual level data, the predictors to estimate the value of an outcome. For example, so let's understand this with an example that one might wish to predict an adult's 10 years risk of developing lung cancer. So investigator might use machine learning method, penalized estimation, or one of the many available methods to develop a prediction model using data set containing both predictors and lung cancer event data. So one more example. Let's take one more example. So if I have data on 100 patients in an emergency department coming to a tertiary care hospital in Karachi, and I'm using that data to understand the 30 days mortality of those 100 patients. So if I want to know the mortality of 150th patient that will be coming to the hospital in next few months, so I'll be using the predictive model. So it is used for predicting new and future observation based on the current data you have. So it often starts with quantifying the association between x and y, then it progresses to more complex one, like using tens and hundreds and thousands of x variables to optimally predict the patient's outcome. And the prediction estimates are the point or the interval prediction. Okay, now let's use the previous example to understand this prediction model. So using data from the above study of exercising regularly on blood pressure. So my question at the prediction model would be, if I exercise 1 hour per day, to what extent my blood pressure is likely to drop? So are you able to understand or figure out the difference between causal model and prediction model? Like in causal model, we were interested in relationship of x and y, and in prediction model, we are predicting the individual kind of data, that how much to what extent my blood pressure is likely to drop. Again, take using the above example, use effect of aspirin on the risk of stroke. What is the risk of stroke for female who is 77 years old, who smoke, no cardiac disease, and who typically takes aspirin daily? So again, using the equation from our causal model, we can predict the risk of stroke for the female using these data. Again, we have used the prediction modeling a lot in times of COVID pandemic. So governments and scientists, public health people have used data from the hospital, the administrative database, the government database to to forecast the second wave, to forecast the future of the disease, how much mortality we would have, and many journals are flooded with such kind of publications. We can ask, for instance, if you are interested in asking when will COVID end in Pakistan, or when will the cases likely to drop, when will we flatten the curve on what is the predicted date for the second wave to happen, and things like that. So uh, we need data on thousands of patients, hundreds and thousands, and based on the assumptions, based on the different estimates, so based on the number of current infections, based on the R naught, the infectivity rate, and based on the virulence, and based on the number of people who are getting affected, based on the current mortality rate, we can predict the future. So this is how this has been used by various people in academia, and this kind of prediction modeling has been used for many years for forecasting, for data mining, and this has been used using machine learning methods and algorithms. And my colleague Amir, who is hosting this talk, is in a better position to speak more about the prediction modeling if anybody wants to learn about the prediction modeling in detail. So I'll take a pause before we move on to our next section, which is the second key point of the presentation today, which is causal models in more close-up. This is one of the useful resource if anybody would like to go and read the difference between difference between explanation and prediction modeling. Okay. So far we have discussed about the two main purposes or the goals of model building, which is prediction and causal explanation. Now we'll be discussing more about the causal explanation. So how do we drive valid causal inferences? The causal inferences, which are unbiased effect estimates. So what is unbiased? Unbiased, which is true representative of X and Y without any error, without any bias, without any error. Remember, like without confounding and without bias. So here on my right is the picture of the book, which is Causal Inference. What if? This is written by Miguel Hernan. This is a professor at Harvard, and he has written tons of literature, articles, books. He has an online course on edX. Draw your conclusions before drawing your draw your assumptions before drawing your conclusion. I would really urge you to take that course. I've taken that personally, and I've really greatly benefited from that. If you really want to understand more on the causal model, so how to get an unbiased effect estimates? So it was traditionally believed that we can only get the causal effects from a RCT, from a randomized control trial. But he and his colleagues and many professors recently, in after 2010 and in 2013 and in the last decades, demonstrated that we can draw the causal inferences from observational studies too. So in order to get an unbiased effect estimate of X and Y without any error, without any confoundings, he suggested many things. I would really urge you to go and read the book, go and read his articles. But as we think through, there is an unexhaustive list. So it requires high quality data. It requires subject matter expertise, because you need to know your model before. You need to know your conceptual model before you really dive or dig into the analysis. You need the advocate statistical tools or methods. So the subject matter expertise is also not enough. You need to pair up with a statistician to apply the right tools and right methods. You need to ask the right question, and again you need to draw the right assumptions, and you can add on to the list. So let's first touch upon the confounding, and then we will focus on the biases and the other errors and other problems in drawing valid inferences in our later presentations. So first, what is confounding? So in our past knowledge, past theory, past academic life, we have learned that uh, if the relationship of exposure and disease is affected by the third variable, if there is a third variable present, then we would not say the association is valid. The association might be spurious, and the true effect, we would say, is confounded. So the crude OR is the biased effect estimates of the effect of E and D. So when there is a presence of third variable, generally it's not that simple. There is no single third variable. There are many third variables in the relationship of X and Y. Generally, if we have encountered or have done any analysis. So when we think that any third variable is affecting the relationship of X and Y, then we have learned that this is a confounding, and the crude estimate would be the bias. If from our past knowledge, from our graduate studies, from the literature, whatever we have learned from our colleagues, from our peers, that there are a couple of strategies to identify the confounders. That's what I have learned too. That there are data-driven strategies like automated variable selection. You compare the beta coefficient of adjusted and unadjusted effect estimates. Then there is another criteria which is known as confounding by criteria, when your variable is associated by exposure and your variable is associated with the outcome, and your third variable does not fall in the causal pathway, then you would say that this is also a confounder. However, I'll try to explain and demonstrate that despite using these two criteria, the confounding remains. So, what are the other solutions to identify the confounder? These methods may not potentially control for confounding. So, let's look on to the methods which can identify and control for confounding. So, Miguel Hernan and there are other scientists and epidemiologists and econometricians say that if the third variable is a common cause of exposure and disease, then it is the confounder. If the third variable is confounder due to common cause, then how do we adjust for confounding? Then we know that if we stratify or adjust them for in the analysis, then we will able to control the confounding. So here, let's discuss the example. This is the causal diagram of the effect of diagram on my right. The effect of human immunodeficiency virus seroconversion on 10-year risk of stroke. So here is smoking is the common cause of HIV and stroke, and age is the common cause of HIV and stroke. So here, smoking and age are the confounders. And if we want to know the true effect of HIV seroconversion on stroke, we need to adjust for smoking and age in the model, or we can stratify for them. I hope this idea is clear. I can give more example as we move along. So how do we identify if anything is the common cause? So here the researchers made a causal diagram. So the concept of causal diagrams or the conceptual framework is not new to many. I know for sure. So in the recent literature, it is commonly referred to as directed acyclic graphs, known as DAGs. If you read the recent literature in epidemiology and Miguel Hernan's literature, and there are other researchers here, if in fact in North America, that really emphasize the role of DAGs in research in epidemiology, and then how do you make your assumptions explicit here, and why this is called directed and acyclic graph. Acyclic because causes precedes the effects. Here HIV comes before the stroke, and there is a direction implies that there is a causal effect. Age is affecting the HIV is not affecting age. Are you getting my point? So that's why these are called as directed acyclic graphs. Here is another example. Just below the HIV, you can see another example, which is multivitamin, which is our main exposure, may reduce the risk of certain birth defects, which is our outcome. However, there is a common cause to it, common cause to this relationship, which is maternal age. So maternal age affect multivitamin use also and risk of certain birth defects also. So maternal age is a common cause of multivitamin use and risk of birth defects, and that's how this is classified as a confounder and needs to be adjusted in the model to get an unbiased effect estimate. So these are the qualitative causal models, and these are generally used to guide statistical modeling. This is again one more paper by Miguel Hernan, that causal knowledge as a prerequisite for confounding evaluation and application to birth defect epidemiology. I would urge everyone to read this paper for better understanding of this new criteria of the common cause to identify and control for confounding. This is a software called Degity.net. This is a free software. And if you have a causal model in mind, you can draw your causal model, and it can help you identify your which variable is a confounder and should go in the model, and which variable is not a confounder and should not be adjusted for in the model. So now, if a variable which is associated with exposure and outcome, and it is not on the causal pathway, we might think is a confounder. No, but it can be a collider. How it can be a collider? So common effects are known as colliders in the causal graph theory. The presence of common effect colliders makes us avoid expectations between exposure and disease. And since they are the common effect, we should not include them in the model. If we include them or adjust them in the model, it will include a bias. So let's understand what is a collider. So in a relationship between folate intake and preterm delivery, we know that folate intake also affects low birth weight, and preterm delivery also leads to low birth weight. However, the arrows are going from E and D into the low birth weight. Low birth weight is not the common cause of low birth weight is it's not the cause of folate intake, and low birth weight is not the cause of preterm delivery. It is a common effect. So if the third variable is associated with exposure and outcome, but it is not the common cause, it is the common effect, then it is known as collider. I hope I am clear enough. If I am not, I can present and come up with more examples in my next presentation. So just for now, let's take a 1 second break and understand the difference between confounder and collider. Confounder are the common causes and collider are the common effects. In common effects, the directions are going from exposure and disease into the third variable, right? And in common cause, the direction is going from the third variable into exposure and disease. Collider should not go into the model for adjusting, and confounders should go into the model to get unbiased effect estimates. What is mediator? So if the effect of exposure and disease is is mediated through M, if there is a third variable in the pathway, then this is called the mediator. Many of you might be aware of with the concept of mediator. So there is a total effect and there is a indirect. The total effect can be divided into direct and indirect effect. So if exposure is directly affecting the outcome, this is the direct effect, and when exposure is indirectly affecting the outcome through mediator M, this is called the indirect effect, and mediators should not also go into the model. So let's look at the example of mediator. So anti-epileptic drugs affect birth defects through reducing the folate level. So here the folate levels are the mediator. So far in causal model building, I have explained about how to get unbiased effect estimates, how to get the valid effect estimates, if there are many variables that are affecting the association of exposure and disease, exposure and outcome, we need to understand that that third variable is confounder, is collider, or mediator. If we can adjust for all the confounders, we can get a valid unbiased effect estimates, right? So here we have discussed about confounders, colliders, and mediators. Now let's summarize and let's understand these two ideas with the examples. So here, this is the first example that we discussed in their presentation, the relationship of exercise and blood pressure. So in the universe of exercise and blood pressure, there are a host of many other variables like person's age, salt intake, lifestyle, cardiovascular diseases. There are many factors that are affecting the relationship between exercise and blood pressure. So here I've drawn a causal diagram. I've drawn a DAG, a directed acyclic graph in this relationship. Can you help me identify which is the confounder and the collider? I know this is live streaming. You can type in your answers into the chat box. And uh, in the interest of time, I understand this is 9:33 and I have to like stop in a couple of minutes. So in this model, in this causal diagram, in this DAG, age is the common cause. As you can see that the arrows are going from age into the exercise and blood pressure. It is the common cause, and that's how it needs to go into the model for adjusting. And what is the collider? So collider is the variable from which is the effect of exposure and outcome, from which arrows are going. So arrow from exercise is going into the cardiovascular disease, and arrow from blood pressure is also going into the cardiovascular disease. So cardiovascular disease is the common effect of both exercise and blood pressure, and hence this is the collider. So previously, if I have used that model, like if the third variable is associated with exposure and outcome and does not fall in the causal pathway, we would have considered this as a confounder. But now we are using a different criteria to understand the difference between confounder and a collider. And this is my last example, after which I'll be concluding my presentation. This is again our previous example, the use of aspirin, the effect of use of aspirin on the risk of stroke, 10-year risk of smoke. So here in this causal diagram, we have other factors like smoking, atherosclerosis, and education level. which affects the relationship between aspirin and risk of stroke. And here, the common cause is smoking, which is the fact which is affecting the both the daily use of aspirin and the risk of stroke. And um, and and you really need to have a sound scientific background and knowledge to understand and make these causal models. And what is the mediator in this relationship? Mediator is atherosclerosis, because aspirin is exerting effect, is reducing the risk of stroke by reducing atherosclerosis. So now, I would like to take your leave and summarize what we have discussed in last 25 to 30 minutes. That broadly speaking, there are two goals of model building: causal explanation and prediction. Causal explanation is testing the relationship, the association, or the idea that does X causes Y, does X leads to Y. In causal model, we need to have a priori theory, we need to have a model, we need to have a causal diagram, we need to have a conceptual framework. And we are interested in why we need a model, why we need a causal diagram, in order to understand what are the host of other variables that can affect this relationship. And we are interested in an unbiased effect of X and Y. In order to get an unbiased effect estimate, we need to understand in what ways, in what manner this association can get biased. We can get an erroneous effect estimate, we can get a biased effect estimates, and we need to take care of all the biases like confounding, selection bias, and all kind of biases. So I've helped you unpack few methods by which we can introduce a bias or we can avoid a bias. We can avoid the bias by including confounder in the model, and we can include a bias by including mediator or collider in the model. And in my next presentation, I'll be talking about the table 2 fallacy, building upon these concepts, like what are the variables that should go in the model, like confounders should go in the model and mediators and colliders should not go into the model, and how do we interpret the coefficients from the table 2, and why it is called the table 2 fallacy. So thank you so much, Amir, for providing me this opportunity. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to take that. I'm closing my presentation here.
Okay, so now we will go to questions. There is one question it's asking what is the difference between attributable risk and predictive model. Example two you gave, I'm a little confused. So would you like to respond to this?
Uh, yes, Amir, I think I can partly answer, and I might need your help in predictive model as well. So, this is a good question. You really need to understand that attributable risk is from the causal model. So causal model is the effect of X and Y. When we are estimating the risk, what is the risk of 10 what is the 10-year risk of stroke after, say, you are using aspirin for the 30 years. Then if you have effect estimates like relative risk or incident rate, then you can tell the attributable risk, that the risk of getting stroke due to the exposure, due to the taking the reduced risk of stroke due to the taking aspirin is this much. This is called the attributable risk when you are attributing it to the exposure. However, in prediction model, there is no effect estimates. So you have 10 variables. Let's say you have age, you have gender, you have smoking history, you have all the lifestyle habits, and you have data on 10 years risk of smoke. You want to know the 20-year risk of stroke. Like, you want to predict the future observation. You don't know the future outcome. Like, you only have a data on 100 patients, and you want to know the risk of stroke for the 150th patient. Are you getting my point? I hope I'm clear. So it starts from causal modeling. It starts from the relationship and the association between X and Y. However, it goes on further to know the unknown, risk of stroke for the patients who are not including in the analysis. It predicts the future trend. It might take into account way more factors. It might take into account way more variables than a causal model could entertain. I've tried my bit. Amir, would you like to add something?
Right, and I think you excellently explained. Simply attributable risk is the proportion or number or the the portion of the diseased positive patients, you attribute or risk to a particular factor. So if you remove that particular factor, how much of the diseased population you are going to decrease? That is the concept of the attributable risk. But prediction is, as Salima said, it's related to how things will behave in the future. For example, we want to predict my blood pressure in time in future. So what is my diet? What is my physical activity like? What is my other factors like? You have to take a lot of factors and then predict my blood pressure, say when I'm 40 years or older. So that, I hope that clarifies some of it. The next question is only mediator. Salima, you want to add something?
Yes, so in order to predict your future blood pressure for 40 years, you need the data for past 40 years. Like you need a lot of data to predict the future outcome. That's what a point that I wanted to add, that you need the current data of hundreds and thousands of observations to predict the future observation.
Exactly. So the next question is only mediator condition is enough for causal condition, causal association?
I am not fully clear that what the question is intended to ask. Can you just elaborate it a bit further, giving a more detail
Okay.
about what?
Zaframan, can you just be clear in asking your question, that what exactly you want to ask? And I think I have a question before there are, since there are no more questions in chat. So can you elaborate a bit more on conceptual framework while designing the study, because all of these things are related somehow to conceptual framework.
You know, in designing my own thesis, be it in my master's thesis or be it my PhD thesis, this thing really come up, that how to design a good conceptual model. Because if you have a good conceptual model, that it can really guide a good statistical analysis, so that we don't end up into fishing. So, for instance, if I really want to know that what are the other host of factors that affects this relationship of use of aspirin and the risk of stroke, I have to look up the tons of literature, that what are the other variables, what are the predictors of use of aspirin, and what are the predictors for the use of for I mean, what are the other variables in the literature or in the real world setting or in the context that could affect the risk of stroke. So I mean, I really have to dig down and make many conceptual map. Then only I can arrive onto my final conceptual map, that these are the host of variables that can affect the use of aspirin, and these are the host of variables that affect the risk of stroke, and these are the variables, my third list of variables, that affect both the use of aspirin and the risk of stroke. And now this is how the arrows goes from this, and this is how the arrows goes from this, and this is an iterative process, and no single causal model is correct. To be honest, no single causal model is perfect, but there are reviewers and there are journals who are recently asking for your causal model if you are making any causal model in your statistical analysis. If you are saying that X is leading to Y in your causal experiment, you might need to present a DAG if you are submitting any article on causal model. That's what I have learned so far.
Right. And talking about the conceptual framework, how if a novice researcher is going to design his or her study? So, what do you think? Like, how can they make a conceptual framework, and what is the role of literature search in that?
I think the role of literature search is very huge and very important. It is only because of the literature and somehow subject matter expertise and somehow biological plausibility that I know, like salt intake is also lead to it's also associated with the blood pressure. Like it is only the literature search that I would know that certain race and ethnicities is linked to the health seeking behavior. Like it is a literature search and my private experience that I know that health seeking behaviors affect the use of aspirin. And this is a literature search that I would know that access to healthcare and the distance to health facility and the poverty and the other social determinants of health and my affordability also affects the use of aspirin. So without I mean, I can also make up my own conceptual model, but I can use also the conceptual model from the literature, and the literature can also guide me that these are the factors that affect the use of aspirin, and it is the literature that will guide me that these are the predictors or these are the factors that affect the outcome. So I mean, I think I am paralyzed without literature. I mean, I am not a genius and not an expert, so I need a tons and tons of references and backing to understand like what is leading to what. And to be frank and honest here, despite we do a lot of literature search, there remain a host of variables, the unmeasured variables, the unknown confounders that can still affect the relationship of X and Y. So we need to do our best, what we can, and then we need to be transparent, honest about what was left and what we did.
Okay. You referred to a course from edX, which is from Harvard University.
Yes,
I'm
yes.
sure that some of the participants would like to go there and explore that. Can you give a more detail about that course, and especially if that course and the content is free or not, and if people want to get certified, how it is the cost of certification?
There is a cost of certification of edX. You can audit this course for free, and this is offered once a year. I took that course, I think last year I mean, in fact, this year, early in this year, in January or February, and I completed that course towards March. And this course is, I mean, free for auditing, and you can pay the price for the certificate towards the end. If you are not auditing, if you are taking it for the credit, the course is draw your assumptions before your conclusion, and this is course by Miguel Hernan, and this is offered by the professor at Harvard, Miguel Hernan, who is considered to be kind of the father of new modern epidemiology, and he has done extensive work on how to draw the causal inferences either from experimental studies, and he has proved the methods. He have given the methods and theory that how can we draw the causal conclusion from observational studies as well, how to ask the right question. And he has written many articles and many books on this topic on causal inference. So I can write this in the chat box. Draw your conclusion before your assumption. Draw your assumptions before your conclusion. Sorry, draw your assumptions before your conclusion, and I can uh, share the link too. Just a minute.
So this is the title of the course, and if you want are interested, you can go to edX. It's a course from
Yeah.
Harvard. You can take it for audit it for free, which means that the content is available for free. But if you want to get certified, then you have to pay something. I think that will be approximately $50 to $100, something like that. I'm not sure about that. So
Mm.
I think with that, we'll end our discussion. And uh, I'm extremely thankful to Salima for taking out her precious time for such a updating presentation, and I think it refreshed my knowledge as well, and it motivated me as well, and I'm sure that it has motivated many of the participants. The fact that many of the participants attended this live stream is an evidence that it was quite interesting. I will request those of you who will be watching the recording of this live stream to please give us your feedback in the comments as well. If you have any questions, you can still give your feedback in the comments. And if you like this video, please share it with your colleagues so that we can sensitize individuals and professionals on these concepts, which are emerging concepts. And we will keep you updated about the future uh, plans, which will be live streamed through our YouTube channel. We are planning to conduct similar guest lectures in the future as well. I will say thanks once again, Salima, for giving us time. Take care, everyone. Thanks a lot. Bye.